Next up, we have a panel moderated by Rafa, who is one of the scientific assistants to the CEO here at Molecule, and he'll be speaking to 3 people who are intimately acquainted with the IPT model and these currently tokenized projects. And then after that, we have a fun little roundup of a nucleate pitch competition where you guys get to vote on the winners. So that's what we've got on the agenda. Oh, also while I'm here, there is a side-out event at the office afterwards. So if you don't want to leave in the rain, you can just stay here and attend the side-out event. Cool, okay. Yeah, and then, whoops, for you guys to pass around. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so hello, welcome. We're finalizing the first day, and right now we have a panel with one of the first wave of the DAOs that were funded through Bio, Vita DAO, Valley DAO, Psi DAO, and we're discussing basically something around their tokenization of IP, their projects. And we're going to make this quite interactive. So I'm going to ask the 3 of you to please introduce yourselves really quickly, maybe your DAO as well, what your focus area is on, and we take it from there.
Yeah, Paolo Binetti. I am from Vita DAO, which is the longevity DAO. We fund the drug discovery, and in particular drugs which have the potential to extend lifespan and health span. And I've been with the DAO for 3 years. Many look at us as an example, maybe one of the first DAOs, one of the most successful. We have deployed a few millions. Now we have about 25 ventures around. But because people look at us as an example, then I feel the pressure to keep delivering. And yeah, it's great.
I'm Morgan Richards, one of the co-founders of Valley DAO, and we focus on funding and helping to translate climate biotechnologies.
My name is Chris Burns. I'm one of the co-initiators of Psi DAO, a psychedelics DAO focused on the progress of really tokenizing psychedelic science and art. We kind of add a different mission into that in a certain level. I'm also an intellectual property advisor to Molecule and to BioXYZ, and patent lawyer to a number of the DAOs in here. I've done actually some work now that I'm remembering, Pablo, on the Vita DAO side. And so also inside DAO, it's kind of a fun space for myself and Jesse Hudson, who's also the Molecule chief legal architect. As we do the legal design for a lot of the fundamental protocols that go out into market, there's a whole world of interesting things that come up, you know, in the legal imaginary for different ways to experiment with what we're doing. And so Psi DAO, for me, is really this kind of laboratory for legal design as well. And we have some innovative, I think, models and uses in there in some ways. But thank you.
Let's start with you, Chris. I'm curious, let's start as the first question. Very briefly, how do you source projects to the DAO, and what do you decide what's worth tokenizing?
Yeah, so, you know, Psi DAO's gone through several kind of iterations, births and rebirths is maybe a good way to put it, until we've got to where we are now. Along the way, we've had different pipelines and sort of means for sourcing deals. A lot of what we, essentially what Psi DAO ended up doing and what we're in the process of doing is trying to delegate out our authority to what right now we have 34 different members. We have 2 different tokens in our system. The Psi token, which is the general governance utility token that most people are familiar with all the other DAOs, and the Psych token, which is actually more like a cooperative membership token. And we decentralized progressively with our Psych tokens following the Fibonacci sequence. So it started, Paul, Kohlhaas, Jesse, and I were the first three when we did this iteration of the launch, and we've decentralized our way out to 34, so we'll be expanding out to 55 kind of next. We do this so that we can try and choose, bring people into our community who have a wealth of different experiences, including those who are scientists who are already active in kind of what would be a deal flow network. Fortunately, among our psych holders, we have top other psychedelic lawyers in the space, people who are just following market activity all the time and who get exposure to a lot of deals. So in a lot of ways, there's been general calls out for deal flow, but I think what's come in has come largely through individual relationships that we've been building as we kind of try and build out this inner growing core part.
Thank you. Morgan, what about you?
Could you repeat the question? Because I was so interested in what Chris was saying.
So how do you source projects that come to ValiDAO, and how do you decide what's worth tokenizing?
Yeah, so we've taken a couple of different approaches. I would say to start with, we were kind of inviting people to apply to us and reviewing all of those applications. But what we found was, the projects, it's kind of like a selection bias. The projects that are searching for funding are often the projects that no one really wants to fund. And so now we go out and we proactively search for projects within verticals that we're interested in. So if you know anything about climate biotech or synthetic biology, you'll know that it's actually a very, very broad and expansive field. So what we try to do is break it down into individual verticals or sectors or impact areas that we're interested in. So for example, one of the most recent deep dives we did was in biomining. So we went out, identified all of the most relevant and innovative researchers in that field at that time. We spoke with many of them, we invited them to apply, we helped them craft their proposals to be as good as they could be, and then we took it to the community to review. We also then took it to external reviewers as well, so we didn't just have our own kind of DAO-focused bias on which projects were interesting. We looked at, we reached out to experts in the field who could give their independent opinion on whether or not these actually had a significant market opportunity. As a result of that, we ended up funding a really awesome project in biomining with a Australian, I guess, they're not a university, they're more like a focused research organization. And that project started, I think, February this year, has already started generating some results. And I think this is the kind of approach that we're leaning towards now. So moving forwards, we're also building a platform for researchers to help make their research more fundable. So our kind of future thinking vision for that is that we will bring in 99% of all projects out there in climate biotech, and we'll be able to see them, incubate them, and then get them to a point where either they're interesting to be funded by us as a DAO or by our kind of network of funding partners, which we will be kind of eventually opening the deal flow up to.
Great, thank you. Paolo, same question to you, but I'd like you to maybe add some words to VitaDAO Fellowship and how does that tie up to the whole process?
Yeah, so basically 90% of what you said, same thing in VitaDAO. We have two channels. First channel is we go actively source deals by going to conferences, leveraging our network. And then passively, we have an application form that anybody can fill in. And then once we have a preliminary application or a preliminary proposal, we make sure that it fits our eligibility requirements, so that it is on thesis, that it is investable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then once that's done, it justifies investing more time on our side and on their side to prepare a proposal and incubate it to the point where it becomes solid. And then it's reviewed by experts in the field, and finally it's voted. So that's the whole funnel, and the sourcing is only the first part. You were asking also how we decide. So how did we decide it's that way? And Your other question was
Around the fellowship.
Yeah, so we actually, since about a year, have 2 stages of funding. What I've talked about up to now is research projects which would typically amount to 200 to 300,000 euros or dollars. So the idea is that at the end of that funding, in about 2 years to do the research, you have commercially valuable IP. So typically something that you could patent. And that means that you need to be at a relatively, well, I'm not going to say mature technology readiness level, because we are still very early stage. We are drug discovery. But you at least need to have identified a target and already have some idea of the drug product, the molecule that you are aiming for, maybe some hit. And so maybe you want to do with this 200K target to hit or hit to lead. But what if you are a researcher and you have a cool idea, which is much earlier? So for example, you think that you can discover new targets, new proteins that might be very relevant for longevity. So that's a stage which comes first, and we would fund it with a smaller check, 50K, and we would open it up to younger researchers through this VitaDAO fellowship. And our sweet spot would be a researcher which is able to bring his or her idea outside of academia in order to make it simpler. We don't have to go through the TTO, and then if those 50K are able to generate a killer experiment that produces an excellent target with data, then this would be a perfect candidate as a follow-up for a full project of 200 and 300K. So in fact, by answering very longly to your question, I actually have to add a third way of sourcing projects, which is by generating them internally. And maybe we will have a fourth one coming up, which will be generating them with AI agents.
Thank you, super exciting. So now that we gave a brief intro as to where is the deal flow, the sourcing of projects coming, I really want to share the next things for the audience. Now that we saw HairDAO's presentation, Curetopia's presentation, and we can see the usefulness, the usage of DeSci in accelerating, cutting costs in some of the processes that in traditional science take a long time or high levels of funding. I would like for you to, anyone who wants to take first the microphone, maybe Morgan, you have it already, but to talk about like the individual projects that you are now developing. How have you seen the development using DeSci tooling, using decentralized communities, compared to what would take in terms compared to traditional science or traditional biotech funding? You can talk about costs, you can talk about efficiency gains, or even patient recruitment if applicable. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a few relevant key points to highlight. I obviously won't have time to go into like a lot of detail on them, so I do want to plug a video that we recorded with some of our researchers that actually goes into a lot more depth on how DeSci as a whole has benefited their research compared to traditional science. So yeah, just look ValleyDAO up on YouTube and you can find those videos. But I would say there's kind of a few key things. One is like traditional science kind of happens in a way that you go out, you learn something, or you experiment on something, you find something interesting, and then you try and find a market for it, right? But what we're doing is kind of flipping that model and being able to help build a business case for a technology from the very beginning. So when we're actually building the technology, we can use that information and the knowledge of how it needs to be for the market to design the technology from first principles. So we're not, kind of building ourselves into a hole where we actually find we've built something that is no longer scalable because it was built on foundational lab technology that is too expensive and is not going to work at industrial scale. Instead, we can already start to look at what do the industrial bioreactors look like, what capacities do they have, what parameters do we need to optimize for, and design that technology from the ground up. So that is true of particularly our first funded research project where we're producing cocoa butter through fermentation. That already had a major kind of pivot point, which is that we knew we wanted to produce microbial lipids, but we weren't sure which ones. We first thought kind of fuels, like biofuels, and in the end, through market exploration, we decided to go with cocoa butter. For lots of different reasons, cocoa butter market is highly fluctuating, it's very insecure. And so this actually makes a great first market for that particular technology. But of course, the technology we're building isn't just for producing cocoa butter, it's a platform technology. We can tweak and tune it and produce different products in the future. But now we've saved ourselves potentially hundreds of thousands and like years of applying for grant programs because we already know what we're going to market with from the start. We're not developing the platform and then thinking, okay, now we need to actually try and pivot it towards what the industry actually wants. So I'd say that is a major benefit, and it doesn't even necessarily come from DeSci and the primitives itself. It comes from the way in which science is funded, because it's kind of a backwards approach to the funding of science, right? From maybe a slightly different angle, I would say the rapidness of how quickly we were able to fund some of our research projects through the IPT framework is just extraordinary. I mean, we knew what we had in terms of the project and the value that they potentially held, but we weren't prepared for how quickly these projects got funded and how well they were received by, I guess, the demand side who wanted to fund these types of projects. So I would say that has been a huge eye-opener and kind of reinforces the belief that we all maybe held, which was that we can, that people, ordinary people, do want to fund science, and they do care about the work that's being done in science, and they do care about the impact that it can have on their lives as well. So I think those are some of the big takeaways from our perspective on funding research.
And Chris, same question to you. I know that right now there's some tokenization projects going on SciDAO. Any insights there that you can share against doing the traditional way?
Definitely. SciDAO again is I think really unique in that our goal and sort of market thesis is less about trying to get individual IP tokenized that's going to be of particularly high value. Of course we want that. But I spent over a decade in the patent licensing world and doing patent litigation and all different types of IP and international trade in large deals for a while before coming into this space, and saw everything move where IP risk management is actually kind of the driving thing of cost of doing business, and intellectual property in the market just generally has shifted so much towards IP risk management and really thinking about ways where intellectual property networks themselves can reduce the cost of accessing the IP justice system altogether. Tokenization is, in my mind, the future for intellectual property. And in this vein, in the psychedelic space, even though it'd probably be more interesting for everyone if I would share cool psychedelic projects that we are working on and tokenizing and cool art projects, I'm talking a lot about tokenization as a concept and for what we're trying to do and bringing it into the psychedelic space, because it fundamentally is, I think, disruptive in a positive way towards psychedelic culture. We have in the psychedelics market a big gap and a lot of suspicion and tension between really capitalism coming into the psychedelic space and everything that comes with policing and whatnot into a space into essentially a prohibitionist era. And most psychedelics as well, the classics obviously aren't very patent eligible in as much as there's been publicly disclosed information about classic psychedelics for a long time. But indigenous communities, people who are constantly sort of historically marginalized and on the outskirts of this economy perceive all types of harms of expropriation regularly. And tokenization, I think for SciDAO, we go all the way into taking these issues very seriously and thinking about intellectual property and culture and what decentralized science inside psychedelic culture can mean if we can use it to be something that is much more expansive, really something that can help reframe intellectual property culture more generally. And it's in that space, I can get into specifics anywhere from how tokenizing intellectual property ownership at the patent level can save tens of thousands of dollars in due diligence costs down the road. That's one angle. But all the way to tokenizing. We work with Shipibo. Jesse Hudson, who's here somewhere, I'm sure, has worked closely with the Shipibo in Peru for well over a decade in tokenizing art and kenne and these kind of things that we've connected to our tokens have also helped bring in a whole other angle of tokenization and I guess really decentralization, I think, in this broader sense that I think, we're still seeing this. If I had to guess when we'll have it was actually just after hearing more about Molecule Labs today that we were hammering out, even this afternoon, another model where we can further show how a DAO as a trade association, as a space where we're actually facilitating and administering just a network of trading tokenized IP more generally, can itself become a platform and scaffolding for all types of interesting cultural production in that space. So I know that was a little off, but it's where we are.
Thank you. So just to finish off, I think we could talk plenty of time about this, but Paolo, maybe you can talk about like the assets that you have, Vita RNA, VitaFast, maybe talk about Vita RNAs, like super fast preclinical and also spending way less money than...
I will talk fast about VitaFast.
Exactly.
And slowly about Vita RNA. So yeah, Vita RNA, it started from the idea of one of the contributors of VitaDAO, a researcher who had already founded a company that went on to be funded subsequently with very big rounds, Michael Torres, and the idea was embraced by one of our entrepreneur in residence, Anthony Schwartz, who is experienced having been CEO of several biotechs. And the idea is extremely exciting. So in the DNA, you have mutations that take place on a regular basis. And some of these mutations are of a specific type that basically stop all the translation machinery from producing the correct proteins. And it's a class of mutation, and there is one technique which is leveraging RNA that can somehow fix it without modifying the DNA. So that's super cool because you can address not only one disease, but entire classes of diseases in one shot with a single intervention. And then also you're not changing the DNA permanently, so it's safer. And yeah, that's the idea. And we gave less than 100K for a very quick killer experiments, which worked. And that's when we had the data justifying a proper intellectual property token launch, which took place, raised $300,000 more. And with that money, they were able to do more in vitro studies. And just lately, they actually I think today, they disclosed the results of an in vivo study where they gave the intervention, which is an RNA construct packaged inside an adeno, by AAV virus capsid. They gave it to mice, and the mice basically experienced no sign of toxicity, and the compound went to several different organs. So that's extremely promising, and that's amazing what they were able to do with just 400K. So now this paves a way for further development, and that's super exciting. And I need to be fast for VitaFast, they promised.
You have time.
So here the idea was didn't start from one of our contributors, but from an academic lab. And it turns around autophagy. Autophagy is a process that it's taking place in humans, but actually in any animal and even other organism that cleans up the bad products inside the cell, and self-eating, that's autophagy. And it's actually one of the key mechanisms of longevity or of aging if it is impaired. And here the lab had found a way to screen small molecules that were able to boost autophagy, which is relevant in particular for neurodegenerative diseases, but not only. And with that screen, they produced a few hits, and then the project was able to optimize the hits further. I think we are now at the third iteration. We are expecting the results for the third iteration. And the more they optimized, the more the compounds became potent and drug-like. So that's super exciting, and it's more conventional in terms of modality, so small molecules, but it is a bona fide longevity mechanism that we're acting upon. Longevity mechanism, the beauty of it is that it has the potential to be a pipeline in a pill, meaning that with a single molecule, you can apply it to different diseases. And so it's happening under our very eyes. It's extremely satisfying.
And one of the things that Molecule is building right now, you saw it in the presentation of Kevin, Molecule Labs, you'll be able to see real live the updates of the scientific projects that get tokenized as well. So right now you can see the latest development of Vita RNA as well. You can follow their Telegram as well, and you can see what's up, what's the news. And to wrap it up, I'd like for you to share something about how does your DAO support these IP projects, this IP, either IP NFTs or IPTs, but how does it support them? Can be starting from funding. What else can you provide to them?
Yeah, so I think I already mentioned some of the things that we've been doing for our projects, but I would say, yeah, beyond funding, it is exactly the business support. We see ourselves as being an extension and an addition to the research team. And we're really able to kind of explore, not only because we have within the community like the depth and breadth of expertise necessary to evaluate the business and explore different market opportunities, but we have the time, right? We have the capacity that researchers don't when they're spending their 9 till 9 and in the lab trying to make the research and the technologies work. So we see ourselves as being that kind of hive mind, that collective that can help support and incubate the project beyond what would be done through the research. Because typically, like I mentioned, that the yeast fermentation project to produce microbial lipids, I mean, they would have raised a grant to produce this microbial lipids system, but probably at no point during that whole 2-year research span would they have done a market analysis. At no point would they have gone and spoke to customers and tried to identify pain points and needs and requirements for the technology. So, we see ourselves as being that extension, saving time, money, and hopefully, fingers crossed, improving the odds of success of deep tech, which are pretty damn low for the most part.
Yeah, I'd say at SciDAO, we're really trying to become, again, as a tokenized network, build a tokenized IP commons, become a space where essentially our community is the asset that one really gets when you're participating in tokenization, be it an audience or one of our projects that we're building out as an open science, tokenized psychedelic science survey platform, where we use tokenization. There's a great white paper we have up, the OPSI white paper, if you feel like taking a look, that really helps to solve the problem of getting large data sample sets from people taking psychedelics. You can imagine how that's historically not the easiest data set to get, but just how valuable it is. So we're building ways to use tokenization to help there. We're also using, about to use tokenization as a means to administer our community again in a more native way by actually tokenizing, making an IP NFT of the SciDAO brand assets, and then distributing as IPTs, as essentially maybe another Molecule Labs experiment, kind of going meta with it, brand equity that would go out to our psych holders, which are already kind of encumbered on some other duty of care obligations that they have towards the DAO. So I guess in another way too, just getting creative and getting psychedelic with tokenization and science and art is hopefully what we become kind of known for and the go-to spot for.
To wrap up this, Paolo, what about VitaDAO?
Yeah, we help founders and scientists by providing access to experts, advisory, and some extra funding in some cases.
After the first initial funding?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you very much, and I hope this is useful in your knowledge of DeSci.